Greetings, dear anointed ones. Sometimes shouting doesn't make the demon go away. You eventually quit answering the door, so he runs away. Take a moment to process it. Selected ones, you may have lately done something without much fanfare or fireworks, or perhaps without recognizing it. Your whole spiritual dominion was just altered by that. You didn't post a social media announcement. You didn't weep in group conversations about it. You just succeeded. Heaven took notice. Here's a fact that most people don't know. Recurring invites to familiar disarray account for more than 85% of poor outcomes in people's lives rather than bad luck. It's not always a miracle that keeps you safe. Sometimes you get a flash of insight and realize, wait, I've seen this nonsense before. Then you've closed the loop. No holy water or spectacular exorcism, just divine discernment with a dash of frustration. Let's be honest. To be petty, some of you didn't block the number. Every time they call, your life begins to fall apart like flimsy dollar shop thread, so you blocked it. And you know what? You just avoided months or perhaps years of needless spiritual diversions because of that one little, imperceptible, deliberate choice. So, it's hardly a coincidence if things have been especially quiet recently. It's not a setup. It is the result of that single decision. We will discuss more than simply what you accomplished in this video. We'll reveal how it protected you, why it worked, and what it's preparing you for. Take out your diary, your tea, or whatever keeps you centered. Because the counsel you are going to hear is not superficial. It's truth-wrapped spiritual revelation with just enough fervor to put your chronology on divine autopilot. Let's get started. First of all, you denied access to everyone, not just individuals. You didn't just interrupt others. The access points they were utilizing to cause turmoil in your life are shut off. And it goes far beyond just blocking someone or ignoring them. Whether you knew it or not, you made a spiritual choice. Because this is the reality. Some folks weren't using loud assaults to ruin your life. They accomplished this by using silent access, draining talks, subtle energy changes that left you feeling worn out after each encounter, and little manipulations that caused you to doubt yourself. The crazy thing is that it didn't always seem to be harmful. Sometimes I didn't intend it that way. Sometimes it was simply a simple check-in or a joke. But as the seconds accumulated, your soul began to notice what your brain had been trained to accept as usual. What you recently did. Perhaps it was a rejection of the invitation. Perhaps it wasn't responding to that SMS at last. Perhaps it was making the decision to change one's mental, emotional, or even physical path. It broke a pattern, whatever it was. And the finest place for spiritual warfare to lurk is in patterns. The everyday repeating loops that teach you to leave doors open for individuals who no longer belong in your environment, rather than the big, apparent things. You didn't just take them off. You took away their power. You removed their ability to manipulate your empathy, your guilt, or your fear of being misinterpreted. There was more to that choice than just safety. It was salvation. Silent, unpretentious salvation. The sort that changes atmospheres, yet doesn't get any praise. You're beginning to sense the calm now. You're not questioning everything you do. You're not spending the whole night mentally reliving talks. You're not lonely if you're feeling that stillness. It is the interruption of interference. It is the lack of emotional lag. For the first time, you're hearing your own ideas without being influenced by others. You were just shielded from a fresh round of needless bullshit by that one boundary and that one change. The nicest thing is that you don't even have to describe it. They believed that access had been refused. They sensed the shift. You're safe now because you finally stopped handing them the key, not because you resisted them. Second, you violated an unspoken contract that you were unaware you had signed. You may not have even recognized the impact of what you did. You violated an unspoken contract that you were unaware you had made. It may seem odd, but it's true. We sometimes carry around roles, duties, and expectations that were never really ours. We secretly choose to shrink, to please, to accept responsibility, and to maintain peace at all costs at some point, whether it was as a result of trauma, manipulation, fear of abandonment, or the desire for acceptance. Instead of using a pen to sign a contract, we used our actions to do so. Every time we remained quiet when we ought to have spoken out, we signed it. In order to avoid the dispute, we always took the blow. Each time we shrank in order to make someone else feel safer. But you changed lately. No, you said. Or maybe you didn't say anything at all. In any case, you didn't perform as they had anticipated. You did not adopt the previous rhythm. You didn't react the way they were used to controlling you. The cycle was then broken. That behavior broke the unwritten pact on a spiritual level. The vibe changed as soon as you did it, which is crazy. At first, you may have sensed a peculiar tension in the air or guilt. In reality, however, spiritual emancipation occurred. You took back your power. You stood up in silent defiance of carrying what was never yours, not out of anger or retaliation. Now you'll see something. Individuals may become confused, angry, or even hostile. Their access was conditioned on that previous agreement, not because you did anything wrong. And they have no authority without that access. They are unable to utilize guilt. Shame cannot be used by them. They can no longer use your generosity to manipulate you. They are aware of it. By changing that one answer, you spared yourself a great deal of needless drama, worry, and spiritual burden. Your path was reoriented by that one "I'm not doing this anymore" moment that resonated into the spiritual world. You won't be tempted by the same things that used to trap you. You have nothing left to cling to in the cycles that formerly followed you. You are going to stroll in a peace that cannot be taken after breaking a contract that was draining you. Third, you ultimately turn down the false responsibility enticement. Whether you completely understand it or not, refusing to carry what is no longer yours is one of the most powerful things you've done lately. You cease to tolerate the emotional burdens that others continued to attempt to place on you. You no longer accepted responsibility for the turmoil, suffering, immaturity, and bad decisions of others. And that change just prevented you from experiencing needless emotional and spiritual depletion for the rest of your life. You could have believed that you had to keep things together for a long time. You were the one who fixed things, forgave people, and always gave them another opportunity. In the midst of all of that, you mistakenly believed that it was your responsibility to control other people's emotions, reactions, and healing processes. Here's the reality, however. You were never given that task. You were coerced into believing that you would be at blame if everything broke apart, sometimes overtly and other times covertly. Perhaps you weren't doing enough if someone behaved out, because you didn't provide them enough support, which is why they failed. That falsehood turned into a weight, and that burden turned into a way of life. But you dropped it lately. You didn't debate about it or make an announcement about it. You just quit playing the chess games that were so passionate. You gave up carrying the guilt. You gave up trying to explain yourself to those who were never interested in you anyhow. And when you did, a significant change occurred in your surroundings. You most likely felt lighter, less stressed, and less exhausted. And that's spiritual as well as cerebral. Because the energy links that were dragging you back into messy situations that had nothing to do with the goal of your soul were severed by that choice. They don't want you to know this. People who were using your empathy as a leash will get alarmed when you quit bearing fake responsibility. They will claim you have changed. They'll ignore you. But that's only because their dysfunction made it harder for them to manipulate you. When you declared, "That's not mine to carry," you disarmed centuries of deception. By deciding to stop becoming the emotional janitor in other people's shattered homes, you have just safeguarded your future. You're clean. You're not chilly. You didn't leave them behind. At last, you ceased to desert yourself. Fourth, the enchantment was broken when you questioned their story. Quiet, inward-looking, and profoundly spiritual was one of the most significant changes you've made lately. You challenged the version of yourself that others who profited from your uncertainty had given you. You no longer agreed with the picture they painted of you. And something shattered the instant you did it. Not only in your head, but in the whole environment. You may have carried identities and labels that were never really yours for a long time. You were accused of being too emotional, too theatrical, too sensitive, too furious, too selfish, or anything else that fit their agenda. And you began to believe it after hearing it so often. You adapted. You became dimmer. You said you were sorry for just existing. However, such labels weren't descriptions in actuality. They were instruments. Instruments to make you smaller. Instruments to keep you in check. Tools that help you remain controllable by making you constantly question yourself. However, something clicked inside of you lately. It may have been an unexpected chat, a quiet time, or a profound inner knowledge. That one inquiry rocked everything since you're no longer under their influence. You began to query, wait, what if they were wrong about me? The guilt has faded. The humiliation no longer stings as much as it once did. They're beginning to sort out the chaos they thrived on. For the first time, You're seeing yourself through your own eyes rather than theirs. Although it may not seem like much, that mental revolt is really a spiritual revolution. You tore off the mask from the game they've been playing when you stopped believing what they're saying about you. There was no need for you to dispute with them. You did not have to face them. Their words were never the power. You have an arrangement with them about that. And now the illusion is crumbling because you have retracted your promise. This change just prevented future relationships, settings, and circumstances from attempting to utilize that previous version of you as a point of entry. You can't be manipulated the way you used to be. You're regaining your identity in addition to recuperating. And anybody who relied on your bewilderment to feel strong is at risk. The fifth is that you left without seeking redress. You left without requiring resolution. And it was among your most spiritually mature actions to date. Because, let's face it, one of the most overrated and misinterpreted ideas in the world is closure. People discuss it as if it were some enchanted moment in which everyone at last acknowledges their mistakes and everything makes sense. Closure, however, is sometimes really a pretext for continuing to be involved with the exact thing that is draining you. It's a spiritual postponement strategy rather than a need for recovery. It wasn't weak of you to go without waiting for an explanation, an apology, or a last discussion. Power was the issue. It signified that you had finally realized that some individuals are unwilling to tell you the truth because they were never really committed to it. They had no confusion. They knew. Because the instability suited them, they were just content with the status quo. And the karmic cycle was broken when you left without asking for clarification. You did more than merely keep the peace. It was the end of the energetic bargain. A recurring pattern that would have followed you into your following season was broken by you. Because you're really pursuing affirmation when you try to get closure from the wrong people. Someone who based their whole relationship with you on deception is the one you're attempting to obtain the truth from. They wanted you to be trapped, rereading old texts, obsessing over every little detail, and waiting for them to change into someone they never were was what they intended you to do. However, you destroyed the game when you decided on peace rather than the healing performance. You understood that your choice was the last word, therefore you no longer required their approval. You are now at liberty, free, but not flawless or unaltered. They attempted to leave you with emotional hooks, but you're free now. Free from the notion that reciprocal healing is necessary. Free from the notion that leaving quietly indicates a lack of concern. If you feel the abundance of divine love in your heart, now is the time to share it. You can help spread God's blessings by clicking the Super Thanks button on YouTube and contributing $20 or more. This divine gift will touch not only your life, but also the souls of many others through this platform. Each of you has a sacred place in God's great design, and your generosity will be the fruit of our prayers. Take action now. Share your blessings to exalt His kingdom, for you were created to do even greater things in God's loving hands. May God bless you. Their concept of closure didn't matter to you as much as your soul did. Your fate was just redirected by your decision. You didn't just abandon a circumstance, a person, or a location. A cycle was left by you. And since you made the decision to choose peace this time before it was presented, you made room for it to become permanent. Sixth, you chose to keep your knowledge to yourself. Recently, you made a choice that, while seemingly little, had enormous spiritual implications. You made the decision to keep your knowledge to yourself. And silence wasn't the only thing involved. It has to do with protecting oneself. You gave up attempting to communicate your heart, your mission, your recovery, and your development to those who had little interest in learning about you in the first place. You just protected yourself from a whole wave of needless psychic disturbance by doing that. In actuality, some individuals are not interested in clarity. They want authority. They want access to your ideas in order to manipulate, refute, distort, and use them against you. They care, but they don't ask. They inquire in order to come up with fresh ideas for keeping up with your development. Dear brothers and sisters, may God's peace be with you today. I am here to remind you of a profound truth. Our existence is grounded in God's divine plan, unshaken by the world's fleeting concerns. As the Holy Bible says, everything done in faith will be rewarded by God's abundant blessings. Luke 6 verse 38, like that mighty oak tree, our roots are deeply anchored in God's universal truth. Every step we take, every stance we hold is secured by His power. And now, you have the opportunity to be a part of this blessing. When you click this Super Thanks button and make a $100 donation, this act will return to you 100-fold. And for a long time, you may have felt compelled to explain everything, to show that you had a good heart, to guide them through your process in the hopes that they would eventually understand. But something changed in you lately. You ceased distributing the blueprint. That is significant. Your inner wisdom is more than simply knowledge. This technology is spiritual. It is your heavenly plan that has been molded by every conflict you have avoided and every insight you have gained. It is sacrosanct and should not be publicized to those who are covertly trying to undermine the same cause they are ostentatiously supporting. You just put a force field around your next level by selecting quiet. You ceased providing the instruction handbook to saboteurs. You stopped allowing detractors to enter the hallowed laboratory of your development. They're perplexed now, and it's meant to be just that way. The adversary is disarmed by confusion. Silence is your weapon of choice. You were still able to speak. You just choose to use it where it matters. You didn't become silent in terror. Out of wisdom, you became silent. Refusing to respond has its advantages. Power in not providing an explanation. Safety in being quiet. You're not hiding. You're incubating. Safeguarding your downloads. Allowing yourself some clarity before presenting it to a group of people who are simply there to analyze, not to comprehend. That decision just kept your goals, your purpose, and your tranquility intact. Now when you're moving covertly, the divine timing is more audible than any explanation. Seventh, you won't show the guilty that you're innocent. One of the bravest and most spiritually developed choices a person can make is what you did. You declined to show the guilty that you were innocent. You didn't make a plea. You didn't plead to be heard. The folks who opted to lie while already knowing the truth were not the ones you attempted to persuade. And that choice triggered divine justice in addition to protecting your vitality. You eventually come to the conclusion that defending oneself against lies is like trying to fill a bucket with holes. They never cared about the truth, thus it will never be sufficient. Control was what they wanted. You weren't the subject of their falsehoods. They have to do with power. Fabricating stories to portray oneself as the victim. Portraying you as the issue in order to escape responsibility. They mistreated you, not misinterpreted you. And you took away their weapon when you decided to remain silent rather than defend yourself. Because this is the reality. Liars rely on your response to sustain their narrative. To clear your reputation, they need your anger, your fear, and your desperation. You didn't give them any of it, however. You allowed the phony story to spread its tainted air. It was also a calculated move. It was divine. That was the spirit of battle. You changed the course of events by refusing to follow their account of events. You gave up chasing justice, and now they will get justice. Their foundation will be weakened by the same falsehoods they employed to create a platform. The greatest aspect is that you can avoid exposing them. Nothing has to be proven by you. The proof is already being laid up by life. People are observing. The energies are changing, and the truth will be revealed sooner than they anticipate. God never allows the innocent to bear the burden of guilt indefinitely, not because you yelled it. By doing so, you saved yourself from months or even years of emotional strain spent attempting to win over those who never supported you in the first place. You shielded your soul from being forced into a public courtroom with a judge who had already been paid off. You prevented them from winning. You let them to fester in their own deception. And you won't even bat an eyelid when the fallout hits because you'll be so far ahead, so protected, and so healed. Eighthly, you turned down the chance to act like your former self. The majority of individuals would have missed your latest exam. It wasn't noisy. There was no obvious dispute or flashing signals. It arrived in the form of a familiar tone, a familiar energy, and a familiar circumstance that was intended to drag you back into a previous iteration of yourself. Perhaps someone was irritating you the way they used to. Perhaps it was an offensive remark that used to cause a stir. Perhaps it was a subliminal attempt at manipulation by someone who used to profit off your fear, your people-pleasing, or your quiet. However, you didn't perform this time. You didn't respond. You didn't go back. The implicit offer to revert to a version of yourself that you have outgrown was turned down. And it was strong because you were unwittingly supporting a pattern that held you bound to an antiquated identity whenever you responded, when you would shrink, burst, or explain. It was more than simply an emotional identity. It had a spiritual quality. And that pattern was a loop, a gateway, a magnet that repeatedly drew in the same type of mayhem. But everything changed when you refused. That one instance of self-control, disinterest, or quiet wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a real-time change. A new timeline has been sealed by you. You have entered a version of your life where you are no longer able to fulfill the roles you formerly played in the dysfunction of others. They attempted to entice you into being the subject of their manipulation, contempt, agitation, or control. Additionally, you circumvented their plan when you didn't react as they had anticipated. It was more than simply maturity here. It has to do with spiritual development. Because it wasn't simply a circumstance you said no to. It was true. A time frame filled with emotional regression, stagnant energy, and recurring disillusionment. You prevented a future from forming around the previous version of yourself by being grounded in your own development. Unconsciously, they were pleading for the return of that version. But you were wiser. You recognized and respected the transition. You didn't have to demonstrate your transformation. You just demonstrated it. And no matter how loud you performed, that silent opposition was louder. The person you once were is no longer accessible. And your future was completely altered by that choice. The ninth, your destiny was changed by a silent internal choice you made. Everything changed from that moment on, even if no one else saw it. There was no limelight, no dramatic breakdown, no impassioned speech, just a quiet, very intimate moment when something within you declared, "I'm done settling." You didn't yell it out. It was not mentioned in your post. Now is the perfect time to click the super thanks button on YouTube and share God's blessings. You can contribute to His plan and become a part of this divine mission with a donation of $100 or more. Every gift reflects God's generosity, and I believe it will return to you multiplied beyond your expectations. Remember, His protection and blessings are with you in every step you take and every donation you make. You become part of His divine plan. You are a powerful, radiant being, unshakable like His mighty rock. Witness God's miracles, feel the fruits of your generosity in your soul, and illuminate the world with this confidence and courage. Be blessed, and may the Lord's light guide your way. You felt no need to notify anybody at all. However, that internal change, the realization that the bare minimum was no longer sufficient, sent a signal so powerful that the spiritual world had to react. When you get there, people don't realize what occurs. This isn't an angry moment. It's not a fit. It's lucidity, clarity that is firm, grounded, and based on self-respect. And authority is what that kind of clarity is. It speaks louder than any amount of pleading. When you make that choice, your whole energy field starts to change. It signals to the cosmos, "I finally see myself." Those who previously used your generosity begin to feel excluded. Once acceptable surroundings start to bother your soul, you don't want to push open doors anymore. That isn't a change in mood. It's alignment. At this point, reality is forced to follow your choice. It was a spiritual update, a proclamation, and a limit. You drew a line, and that line was definitive, regardless of whether it was about time, love, your mission, or your sense of value. You're feeling things tremble around you because of this. There may be a decline in certain relationships. Some prospects could be waning. Do not panic, because it no longer matches who you are becoming. That is the old world attempting to go. No spectacular departure had the same impact as that one quiet choice. This time, you didn't settle. You didn't give in to ease your agony. You didn't ask for scraps of bread. And the Spirit mirrored that denial. Everything in your immediate vicinity must now either climb to your new standard or disappear. There is no punishment for you. They're moving you around. Because everything that doesn't align with the decision your soul made is no longer valid. This was more than a change in perspective. It was a change of destiny. A silent revolution that altered your course without your consent. And that version of you will be how life reacts from now on. The person who at last understands their rightful place. 10. At last, you recognized the pattern and left it. You witnessed it. It was obvious enough to realize it was no longer random, albeit maybe not all at once. Just dressed differently, the same sort of circumstance, the same individuals, and the same emotional toll. It continued to appear. They have varied names and looks, but they always lead to the same place. And this time, you finally made the connection rather than placing the blame on yourself or offering justifications for other people. The pattern was familiar to you. You got out of it, which is more important. Yes, Because most individuals never reach that level of consciousness, there is spiritual intelligence at work. You halted, but they continue to wonder, why does this always happen to me? You researched the energy. It wasn't a coincidence, you realized. There was a cycle. It was generational as well as personal. Something inherited, a habit, a conviction, a reaction mechanism that you picked up via survival rather than free will. And you decided to quit rather than do it again. Not only did that epiphany alter your course, but it also safeguarded your future. Because patterns lead your goal to be delayed, in addition to draining your delight. They keep you stuck in spiritual ruts that never lead to liberation, needless pain, and outmoded roles. This time, you violated a deal with dysfunction by refusing to cooperate. Your lineage may have been trapped in this cycle for decades or more, but you broke it. The crazy aspect is that you didn't shout. It just required one deliberate choice to say, not again. You didn't cause any trouble. You just took a step back. You stopped disputing with those who have chaotic lives. You stopped taking emotional crumbs and referring to them as connection. You gave up attempting to prove yourself to those who profit from your insecurity. And you did more than simply rescue yourself by doing that. Whoever follows you, your future children, your heritage, your next iteration, you rescued them. All because you were brave enough to watch the game and turn away. You were considered to be permanently stuck in that pattern. However, your awareness just turned into your escape. There was no need for a sign from above. You need a change of attitude. And now that you've succeeded, you've accomplished something that previous generations were unable to. You didn't just recover. You stopped the inherited catastrophe. 11. Instead of running away from the pain, you sat with it. You had the option to flee. You had every reason to run away, divert attention, repress, or behave as if it wasn't painful. However, you didn't. You endured the agony. And just that choice altered your whole course. You finally realized something that most people take a lifetime to comprehend, not because you enjoyed the pain. Avoidance ensures long-term cycles, even if it may provide temporary respite. You had finished repeating. The majority of individuals attempt to dull their suffering. They overwork, overthink, overeat, overwork, pursue relationships, and keep busy. Anything else than to sit quietly and absorb the weight of what's really happening inside. However, you took the opposite action. You choose to be present. You let the pain be felt, the sorrow come to the surface, and the rage come out. Instead of allowing the agony break you, you let it push you. You were dangerous in the spirit world because of it. You learn more by sitting with the suffering than from anything else. It robbed you of your delusions. It became clear who was really supporting you. It made you realize how much of who you are was based on survival and how much more awaits you once the healing process starts. You didn't just make it through the flames. You let the fire to cleanse you. And in ways you don't even completely comprehend yet, that decision raised your spiritual status. Here's the beauty of it, however. You protected your future by deciding to process rather than avoid. Because you are now able to identify emotional traps masquerading as advantages. You are no longer readily seduced by trauma bonding, turmoil, or flattery. When something seems familiar but incorrect, you can tell. You paid for that discernment in full with your quiet, your tears, and the evenings you spent struggling with feelings that most people avoid. You've developed in ways that aren't apparent to others. You have better judgment. The voice of your intuition is louder. You can no longer put up with anything phony or out of alignment. That's no little matter. Spiritual armor is that. And the same thing that strengthened your judgment was the agony that previously threatened to shatter you. You didn't just endure the agony. You let it instruct you. You will never be duped by the same lesson again as a result. 12. You put discipline ahead of fleeting comfort. You made a choice that many people never make in their lifetimes. You put discipline ahead of fleeting comfort. Furthermore, it could not have been spectacular from the outside. There were no lights, no cheers, and no immediate outcomes. However, it was a game changer since it took more than willpower to say not yet, this is not for me, or I'll wait. It served as defense. You did not just oppose something. You stopped a fake. Something seemed to be promising. When you were feeling empty, it may have provided immediate emotional support, rapid money, quick relief, or simple affirmation. You felt in your heart that it wasn't aligned. However, it arrived too soon. There were strings attached. It arrived cloaked in perplexity and wrapped in haste. And you hesitated, refusing to concede. You fought the one to choose a short-term solution to ease your agony. You were spared by that pause. The majority of people are unaware of how spiritual discipline works. They believe it's just about refusing negative things. Real discipline, however, is the ability to refuse things that are almost correct, attractive but poorly timed, and emotionally alluring but spiritually expensive. What you did was also uncommon. Instead of settling for connection, you decided to wait for alignment. The adversary was expecting you would go through that door, but your choice simply closed it. Because you would have been bound to something you would eventually need God to save you from if you had chosen that short route, that fast cure, or that emotionally tangled alternative. You didn't just turn down the incorrect offer. You created room for the genuine thing, the one that is based on truth rather than temptation, the one that won't break your heart, and the one that won't take up all of your energy. In the time, discipline could seem like a deficit, but it's really spiritual foresight. Growth is shown by the statement, "I would rather be temporarily uncomfortable than permanently out of alignment." Maturity is that. Your future is going to look extremely different because of this. The self-defeating loop was broken by you. You declined something that would have temporarily made you feel good, but ultimately cost you dearly. You are now positioned in addition to being protected, set up for something genuine, enduring, and wholly yours, because you were strong enough to wait. 13. You prayed in a unique way, seeking understanding rather than blessings. You may not realize how much your prayer life has altered lately. You no longer pray as you once did. You weren't requesting more tranquility, more possibilities, more friends, or more money. This time, you requested for clarification because you finally understood that your decisions are based on what you observe, not because you were in a desperate situation. And everything started to fall into place around your desire for vision rather than supply. This is a distinct form of prayer. It's not usually accompanied by pyrotechnics or goosebumps. You don't always feel good about it right away. Clarity exposes, which might sometimes make you uneasy. It eliminates illusions. In slow motion, it reveals who is really rooting for you and who is only applauding your failure. It offers the true explanation for why certain doors keep shutting, why some individuals abruptly turn away, and why what you believed to be a boon turned out to be bait. However, that pain is a kind of protection. Clarity not only helps you stay out of danger, but it also helps you avoid being duped into going right into it. A deeper kind of spiritual assurance is engaged when you ask God to show you what's genuine rather than merely providing you what you desire. You stopped letting confusion masquerade as connection into your life. You demanded insight instead of following indications. And your whole godly defensive system was reprogrammed by that one change. This kind of clarity has the advantage of beginning to function even before danger manifests itself. Things begin to appear before they are formed. Before someone speaks, you may feel changes in energy. Even things that haven't been shown to be untrue lose their appeal to you. It isn't paranoid. That is the work of heavenly perception. This explains why certain things have abruptly come apart lately. Why have some individuals stopped talking? Why you felt more at ease, but yet more alone. Clarity is that. Prior to reaping benefits, it prunes. Before it protects, it causes disruption. You're not losing, either. Simply said, everything you requested is functioning. You used to pray correctly, but now you're praying precisely. You're creating filters rather than just seeking blessings. As a result, nothing that doesn't belong in your next chapter will deceive, trick, or delay you. At number 14, you failed to provide a warning shot and instead let them leave. You let them leave without having to be seen, without warning, and without a display. The door wasn't slammed. You kept their secrets to yourself. You didn't send a lengthy message outlining all of the reasons you were finished. You simply and neatly departed. And since your quiet wasn't passive, that choice was an example of spiritual mastery. It was deliberate. It served as defense. Power was the issue. Some foes don't want to fight you, yet most people are unaware of this. They want to take advantage of you. They were fueled by your responses, your justifications, and your enthusiasm. They could keep you bound to chaos for as long as you participated. When you defended yourself, they would play the victim after provoking you and waiting for you to lose it. The trap was that. An endless loop of bait and retaliation, misunderstanding and clearing up, insult and justification. However, you outgrown it. Something holy came to you. Freedom does not need an audience or consent. When you realized what it was, you chose to unplug rather than shout. You represented the truth rather than proving it. And your energy began to heal as soon as you stopped performing for those who were never going to listen anyhow. There wasn't a void in the stillness when you left. It served as insulation, spiritual defense. They came for what you denied them. You denied them the response they need to maintain the plot. They are presently conversing. What they believed would harm you couldn't even get to you, so they're wondering and rushing. Because you didn't follow their lead, the drama they attempted to create didn't work. The tie between you and every story they were attempting to construct around your name was severed by that stillness, which turned into a sword. By doing what many people cannot, walking away when your ego wanted to react, you safeguarded yourself. You opted for silence over show and dignity over drama. And as a result, you simply end a whole spiritual conflict cycle. You didn't just walk out of a situation. You disconnected from the system. It was not weakness to let go without warning. It was sagacity. You acted as if you had finally realized your worth. Being loud is not a prerequisite for having power. As well as the quiet you created, that is the sound of someone who at last realizes they owe chaos nothing, not even a farewell. Although what you did may not have seemed like a significant life-altering event to the outer world, it was a seismic upheaval on a spiritual level. It was more than simply survival that drove every silent choice, boundary respected, and temptation avoided. It has to do with alignment. You didn't yell. Credit was not demanded. You just moved in a different way, and the spirit world took note of that change. You broke the pattern while others continue to reenact the same plays in various clothes, trapped in karmic circles. They triggered you by cutting the wiring. You rejected emotional appeals, disengaged from misleading tales, and favored order over chaos. It was hardly a stroke of luck. Power was that divine force that is grounded and quiet. By making changes to your present, you safeguarded your future. That's why some folks are perplexed. Certain doors closed abruptly, and certain patterns did not recur. It's not that you battled harder. Rather, it's because you made wiser decisions that have protected you spiritually. You were wise in your actions. You resisted being coerced into giving up free energy to systems that were meant to deplete you. This is your affirmation. You escaped a real storm. The threat you were unaware of was approaching. However, the decisions you made recently changed your fate. After passing a significant spiritual test, everything, including people, places, and even time itself, must adapt to your new frequency. So, when necessary, continue to move in quiet. Continue prioritizing vision over approval. And keep in mind that your protection did not come from your shouts. That's what you ultimately declined to consider. Your guard is your progress. Now, don't simply sit with this message if it made you feel better. Allow it to affect you. To demonstrate that you are walking in a new frequency, hit the like button. Tell us in the comments below which section most affected you. Someone else may be praying for confirmation, and your story could be it. Tell your friends, your tribe, or that one person who has been wondering why they feel different recently about this video. Most essential, enable your alerts and subscribe to the channel, because this is a spiritual center rather than just a platform. Each movie is designed to arouse, orient, and energize you for the journey that lies ahead. This is the place to be if you're prepared for greater discoveries, heavenly downloads, and stuff that breaks through the clutter. You are not just here. Something in your soul is ready to change, which is why you're here. Together, let's travel this path.